Her name was Ava Morgan. The moment Ava heard the frantic pounding echoing from the barn behind the ranch, the blood in her veins seemed to freeze. No one in the yard said a word, but everyone knew something had just happened. A storm was rolling in from the horizon. Thick black clouds swallowed the sky above the outskirts of Boise. Strong winds tore through the dry trees, carrying a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. Inside the old barn, a child was crying. And the only person who was truly panicking at that moment was Ava. But to understand why that moment changed the course of her entire life, we need to go back a few hours earlier. Ava Morgan was 34 years old. She was a single mother living with her 10-year-old son, Ethan. To outsiders, Ava seemed like a strong and successful woman. She owned a small logistics consulting company in Idaho, raised her son on her own, owned her own home, and had never relied on her family for anything. But only Ava knew that every visit to her parents' house felt like stepping back into the years she had spent trying to forget. In the Morgan family, there had always been an unspoken rule. Chloe was the pride of the family. Ava was the disappointment. Ever since they were children, Chloe was praised no matter what she did. If Ava earned perfect grades, her parents would ask why she was not at the very top of the entire school. If Chloe failed a test, they would say she was under too much pressure. As the years passed, nothing ever changed. Chloe grew up surrounded by endless indulgence. Ava grew up learning how to save herself. That weekend gathering was being held at their parents' ranch. Ava did not want to go. But Ethan had been excited all week. He loved horseback riding. He loved the wide open fields. He loved spending time with his cousins. For Ethan, she agreed. The moment she stepped out of the car, Ava felt Chloe's familiar stare. Her younger sister stood beside the white fence, dressed in expensive clothes and wearing a carefully calculated smile. Chloe looked Ethan up and down. "He's still so tiny, isn't he?" Ava said nothing. Chloe continued. "Guess he takes after his mother." A few relatives let out uncomfortable laughs. Ethan pretended not to hear, but Ava noticed the way her son's hand tightened around the hem of his shirt. That was what hurt her most. Those comments were no longer aimed at her. Now they were aimed at Ethan. Throughout the afternoon, Chloe found every opportunity to put the boy down. When Ethan tried to help carry food, she said he was too weak. When he talked about how much he enjoyed reading science books, Chloe laughed and said kids should play sports instead of acting like little nerds. Ava's parents sat nearby. No one stopped her. No one defended Ethan. Just like no one had defended Ava all those years ago, everything continued that way until late afternoon. That was when the first strong gusts of wind began to rise. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The adults started gathering chairs and packing things away. The children ran toward the backyard looking for shelter. Ava was helping one of her aunts clean up food when she suddenly realized Ethan was gone. At first, she wasn't worried. The ranch was not that large. But 5 minutes passed. Then 10 minutes. Ethan still hadn't returned. A quiet sense of unease crept down Ava's spine. She started searching. Around the horse stables, behind the main house, along the eastern fence line. Nothing. "Has anyone seen Ethan?" No one gave her a clear answer. A few people simply shook their heads. Chloe stood beneath the porch roof, sipping lemonade as though nothing at all had happened. Then it came. A sound. Very faint. Very far away. But Ava heard it. Pounding. A door being struck again and again. Relentlessly. Desperately. She turned toward the old barn sitting at the far edge of the field. The pounding came again, this time louder. Ava's heart dropped straight into her stomach. She ran. Rain began pouring from the sky. The wind lashed against her face. The pounding from inside the barn grew more violent with every second. Ava, one of the younger cousins, came running after her. The child's face was pale. She was crying as she ran. "Aunt Ava." I saw Aunt Chloe lock the door. Ava stopped for 1 second. Just 1 second. Then she ran again. Inside the barn, Ethan was crying for his mother. And for the first time in years, Ava realized something she had spent her entire life refusing to admit. Some people are not just toxic family members. They are a genuine danger, and she was about to come face to face with that truth. Ava nearly slammed into the barn door. Ethan's voice was still coming from inside. Every cry for his mother felt like a knife cutting straight through her heart. The rain grew heavier. Lightning tore across the darkening sky in the distance. Ava grabbed the handle and pulled with all her strength. The door would not open. It had been locked from the outside. "Ethan, Mommy's here." Her voice trembled. Immediately, she heard a choked sob from inside. "Mom, I'm scared." Ava threw all her strength against the lock. Nothing. She turned desperately, searching for anything she could use to break the door open. One of her cousins came running over. He was carrying a crowbar normally used around the ranch. No one said a word. A few seconds later, the sound of metal striking metal echoed through the rain. The door burst open. Ethan was curled up in a dark corner. His face was pale, tears mixed with sweat. His arms were wrapped tightly around his knees. The moment he saw his mother, he ran toward her. Ava dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. The boy was shaking so violently that he could barely control his body. Everything around them seemed to disappear. There was only the sound of Ethan crying. Then a voice came from behind them. "Everyone's making way too much out of this." Ava turned around. Chloe was standing beneath the shelter, her arms crossed, completely calm, as though the child who had just been locked inside a barn during a storm was not her own nephew. It was just a joke. Those words froze the air. Ava slowly stood up. For the first time in years, she made no effort to keep the peace. A joke? Her voice was terrifyingly cold. "You locked a child inside a barn while a storm was coming." Chloe shrugged. "He needs to learn how to toughen up." At that moment, Ava's father stepped forward. The man who had spent decades controlling every major decision in the family glanced at Ethan and shook his head. "The boy is fine." Ava's mother immediately agreed. "Exactly. Kids these days are far too sensitive." Ava could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her son was still trembling behind her. Yet the only thing they cared about was protecting Chloe. Again. Always Chloe. The rain continued to fall. People slowly drifted away. But Ava no longer had the energy to stay. She took Ethan to the car. During the entire drive home, he barely spoke. He simply stared out the window. That frightened Ava more than anything. Ethan had always been an energetic child. He loved telling stories. He loved asking hundreds of questions every day. But that night, the house was completely silent. Around midnight, the sound of crying woke Ava. She rushed into her son's bedroom. Ethan was sitting upright in bed. His entire body was covered in sweat. "Mom, I thought they left me there." Those words crushed something inside her. The next morning, she took Ethan to see a child psychologist. The evaluation lasted nearly 2 hours. When they came out, the doctor looked at Ava with a serious expression. This is not a normal reaction to a prank. He genuinely believed he had been abandoned. Ava felt her throat tighten. But the real shock arrived a few days later. A message appeared on her phone. It was from Olivia, a cousin she had not spoken to in years. The message contained only one short sentence: "We need to talk." That evening, they met at a small coffee shop outside town. Olivia looked around carefully before speaking. "There are some things you need to know." Ava listened in silence. What happened to Ethan wasn't the first time. Ava looked up. Olivia sighed. Years ago, Chloe caused problems with other children too. But Uncle and Aunt always handled it quietly. Every word sent a chill down Ava's spine. Then Olivia told her about a summer many years earlier. One of their younger cousins had fallen from a horse stable. The family claimed it had been an accident, but several children insisted that Chloe had locked a door, causing the boy to panic and run. No one investigated further. No one talked about it again. Everything was buried, as though it had never happened. Ava felt her entire world beginning to shift. Old memories started resurfacing. The times Chloe created problems, the times other people took the blame, the times their parents stepped in to protect her. The picture Ava had been staring at her entire life suddenly became complete. This was not an isolated incident, not a bad day, not a joke. It was a pattern that had lasted for decades, a system where one person was always forgiven, and everyone else was expected to accept the damage. As Ava left the coffee shop, her phone vibrated. It was a message from her mother. "The family is very disappointed in you." Chloe was only joking. Ava stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, for the first time in her life, she did not respond. She turned off her phone, she looked up at the night sky above the city, and she made a decision the Morgan family would never see coming. This time, she would not stay silent. She would uncover the entire truth, even if that truth destroyed everything that remained between them. Ava made her decision in silence. It was not driven by anger. It was not impulsive. It was the chilling clarity of someone who had finally seen the entire truth. The next morning, she began doing something the Morgan family had never expected. She documented everything. Every message, every phone call, every incident involving Chloe over the years. At first, Ava only wanted to protect Ethan. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized the story was far bigger than she had imagined. A week later, Olivia called again. "There's someone who wants to meet you." That person was Grace, an old friend of Ava's mother, someone who had attended nearly every family gathering for more than 20 years. They met at a small restaurant outside the city. Grace stared at Ava for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" Ava shook her head. "It's not what Chloe has become. The saddest part is that your parents helped make her this way." The words left Ava speechless. Grace explained that many years earlier, when Ava was still in high school, she had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious youth leadership program. It was the kind of opportunity that could have changed her future, but only days before the final interview, Ava suddenly withdrew. For years, she believed she had given up because the pressure was too much. Grace looked at her with sympathy. "No." Ava slowly raised her eyes. "It was your mother." She called the organizers, and she told them you no longer wanted to participate. The entire room seemed to fall silent. Ava could hardly believe it. The memories came rushing back. She had cried for weeks. She had blamed herself for years, and yet the truth had been something entirely different. Grace continued. "Your mother was afraid that if you became successful too quickly, Chloe would feel overshadowed." Those words felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. For the first time in her life, Ava understood. The problem had never been her. She was not lacking talent. She was not lacking worth. There were people who had deliberately kept her behind, so someone else could always stand in front. That night, Ava returned home. She sat alone in her living room. Ethan was asleep upstairs. The house was so quiet she could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then she opened an old laptop. A file she had not touched in years appeared on the screen. Financial reports, contracts, business records. Because there was a truth the Morgan family had never known, or perhaps more accurately, had never cared to know. Ava was not just a single mother. The logistics company she owned managed transportation networks for several major businesses across the region. Its annual revenue far exceeded anything her parents could have imagined, but Ava had never bragged about it. She had never felt the need to prove anything. She did not need their approval. At least she hadn't before. Now things were different, not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted to stop them from causing any more harm. The following day, Ava met with an attorney. She told him everything. About the barn. About Ethan. About Olivia's statements. About the messages she had saved. The attorney listened quietly until she finished. Then he said only one sentence, "We can protect your son." For the first time in weeks, Ava felt like she could breathe again. At the same time, Ethan began attending regular therapy sessions. At first, he barely spoke. But little by little, things started to change. He began talking about his fears, about feeling abandoned, about the moment the door slammed shut in front of him. Every time Ava heard her son tell the story, her heart ached, but she stayed there, listening. Because healing always begins when someone is finally heard. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Morgan family was beginning to lose patience. Ava's phone rang constantly. Messages kept arriving. Her mother demanded a meeting. Her father demanded an explanation. Chloe sent sarcastic texts filled with mockery. But Ava never responded. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. And that frustrated them more than any confrontation ever could, because people who are used to controlling others rarely know what to do when that control disappears. 2 weeks later, another turning point arrived. The Morgan Ranch was preparing to host its annual community event. It was the place where Ava's father had always been regarded as an influential figure in the area. But this time, things did not unfold the way he expected. Several families with young children quietly withdrew from the guest list. A few sponsors began asking uncomfortable questions. No one publicly criticized them. No one caused a scene. But trust was fading. Little by little. Quietly. Yet unmistakably. And for the first time in many years, the Morgan family began experiencing what Ava had felt throughout her childhood. Isolation. Loss. The reality that actions always leave consequences behind. That night, Ava stood by the window watching Ethan play with a small puppy in the backyard. He was smiling again. Not often, but it was a real smile. In that moment, Ava understood something important. This fight was not over. But for the first time in her life, she was no longer fighting alone. And somewhere ahead, the truth the Morgan family had hidden for years was finally preparing to step into the light. The truth did not arrive like a lightning strike. It appeared little by little, slowly, quietly. And then one day, no one could pretend they didn't see it anymore. 3 weeks after meeting with the attorney, Ava received the call she had been waiting for. Several security cameras around the ranch area had finally been reviewed. A neighbor who lived near the barn happened to have a camera facing part of the field. The footage was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Very clear. It showed Ethan walking into the barn. A few minutes later, Chloe appeared. She looked around, walked to the door, and locked it from the outside. Then she calmly walked away. There was no sign of panic, no sign that she intended to come back. When Ava watched the footage, she did not feel victorious. She only felt sad, because at last, what she had always suspected had been confirmed. Chloe knew exactly what she was doing. A week later, the first hearing was held. The room was not large, but the atmosphere felt heavier than any place Ava had ever entered. Her parents sat on one side, Chloe sat between them. The same familiar picture. The child who was protected, the child who was prioritized, the child who could never be wrong. But this time there was one important difference. The truth was there too. The attorney presented the evidence. Ethan's psychological evaluation, witness statements, the security footage. One document after another was placed on the table. One layer of illusion after another was stripped away. Ava's father tried to object. He insisted everything had been exaggerated. He claimed it was all a misunderstanding. But even he could not explain the video. He could not explain why Chloe walked away after locking the door. He could not explain why Ethan required weeks of therapy. He could not explain why multiple relatives had begun sharing similar stories from the past. For the first time in her life, Chloe had no one left to blame. She sat in silence. Her face had turned pale. Her eyes constantly avoided everyone else's gaze. Then the moment of decision arrived. The judge turned through the final pages of the case file. The entire room fell silent. So silent that the sound of paper moving could be heard. Then he looked up. The ruling was made. Protective measures for Ethan were approved. Unauthorized contact would be restricted. Any attempt to approach him directly would have to follow legal procedures. It was not the dramatic kind of judgment people see in movies. No one was handcuffed. No one was escorted away. But to Ava, it meant more than anything else. For the first time in her life, her son was protected by more than just a mother's love. When the hearing ended, Ava's father rose to his feet. He looked at his daughter with an expression that mixed anger and confusion. "You can still stop this." Ava looked at the man who had frightened her throughout her childhood. But the fear was gone. It had disappeared a long time ago. No. Just one word. But it was the answer she should have given years earlier. Her father said nothing more, because he had finally come face to face with something he had never experienced before. He no longer had the power to decide Ava's life. The months that followed were far more peaceful than she expected. The Morgan Ranch still existed. The house still stood where it always had. But everything had changed. The large family gatherings slowly disappeared. Fewer people brought their children to visit. Some social relationships quietly drifted away, not because of rumors, but because of choices. Parents always have the right to decide who is allowed into their children's lives. And many people had made their own decisions. Meanwhile, Ethan began to change. He returned to school with a more natural smile. He started making new friends. He enrolled in the horseback riding classes he loved so much. One afternoon, near the end of autumn, Ava stood beside a wooden fence watching him practice. Golden sunlight stretched across the open fields. Ethan's laughter drifted through the wind. It was a sound she had once feared she might never hear again. Then her phone vibrated. A message from Chloe. The first one in months. It contained only a single sentence. "You won." Ava read it, then quietly deleted it, because Chloe still did not understand. This had never been a competition. Not between two sisters. Not between a winner and a loser. Ava had never wanted revenge. What she wanted was safety. Peace. The chance for her son to grow up without fearing the people who should have loved him. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and watched Ethan smiling brightly across the field. For the first time in many years, Ava felt something she once thought she had lost forever: freedom. Not because her family had changed, not because they had apologized, but because she had finally stopped giving them the power to determine her worth. The sun slowly disappeared behind the distant hills. Ethan ran toward his mother. Ava opened her arms and pulled him into a hug. And as the two of them walked together toward the small house at the end of the dirt road, she knew an old chapter of her life had finally closed. Not with hatred, but with something far more powerful: the truth and the courage to keep moving forward.